I stared at my phone screen through tears, my hands shaking as I typed the message to my family group chat. Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up? The weight of Jake's ashes in my carry-on felt impossibly heavy. After 2 weeks of navigating Ukrainian bureaucracy alone, arranging my husband's funeral, in a country where I couldn't even read the street signs, I just needed to see a familiar face. My brother Scott replied instantly, "We're busy, try Uber." Before I could process that blow, my mother added, "Why didn't you plan better?" I simply wrote, "No worries," then turned off my phone. They had no idea what I was capable of doing next. What they saw on the news that night would make them drop their phones in shock. Jake and I met at a journalism conference in Portland 10 years ago. I was 22, fresh out of college, with dreams of becoming an investigative reporter. Jake was 25, already working with an international aid organization documenting crisis zones with a photographer's eye and a humanitarian's heart. We collided at the coffee station literally, and spent the next 12 hours talking about everything from media ethics to our favorite breakfast cereals. Our connection was immediate and intense. Within 6 months, we were married in a small ceremony by the water in Seattle. My family attended but seemed distracted throughout. Scott spent most of the reception networking with Jake's colleagues from the aid organization. My mother critiqued everything from my dress to the catering. My father Greg smiled politely and kept the peace as always. "Your family is interesting," Jake said that night, as we slow danced under string lights on the deck of our rented venue. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it." I laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. "Hey, they're here." That's something he said, pulling me closer. "Besides, we're starting our own family now." That was Jake, always looking for the silver lining, always giving people the benefit of the doubt, even my family, who never quite seemed to appreciate his warmth or generosity. We built a beautiful life in Seattle. I worked my way up at the Seattle Chronicle while Jake traveled to various humanitarian crises around the world. When he was home, our life was perfect, cooking elaborate meals together, hiking the nearby mountains, planning for the future. When he was away, we made do with video calls at odd hours and detailed emails about our days. "I miss seeing your face first thing in the morning," he wrote once from Sudan. "The way your nose scrunches when you're still half asleep. It's the cutest thing in the world." I read his emails over and over when the apartment felt too quiet. They were a lifeline, proof that despite the distance we were connected. For 8 years we made it work. We had our rhythm. When Jake returned from difficult assignments, I knew exactly how to help him decompress. Sometimes with conversation, sometimes with silence. He did the same for me when tough stories at the paper left me drained or disheartened. "We balance each other," Jake would say. "That's our superpower." The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk at the Chronicle, working on a story about local housing policy. An unfamiliar number with an international code. "Mrs. Ann Taylor," a heavily accented voice asked. My stomach dropped before the caller even continued. Something in his formal tone, the careful pronunciation of my name. "I regret to inform you that your husband, Jacob Taylor, has suffered a cardiac event while in Kyiv. He was transported to Central Hospital, but doctors were unable to resuscitate him." The words didn't make sense. Jake was 35. He ran 5 miles every morning when home. His last physical had shown a perfect bill of health. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. There was no mistake. Jake had collapsed during a meeting with local officials. A previously undetected congenital heart defect, something he'd had from birth but had never shown symptoms. The next hours passed in a blur, calling my editor, calling the aid organization, calling my family. "I need to go to Ukraine," I told my mother when she finally picked up. "Jake is dead. I have to bring him home." There was a pause on the line. "Oh, Anne," she finally said, her voice holding more annoyance than sympathy. "Can't his organization handle that? You don't speak the language. You'll just be in the way." I hung up without responding. Called Scott. "That's awful, sis," he said, sounding distracted. "Listen, I'm heading into a meeting, but let me know if you need anything. Okay. My father was slightly better offering to talk to your mother and asking if I had enough money for the flights. But no one offered to come with me. No one seemed to understand that my world had just ended. I flew to Ukraine alone, 17 hours of travel with shock as my only companion. In Kyiv, I was met by Natalia from Jake's organization, who helped me navigate the paperwork, the decisions, the details no one should have to face alone. Jake was beloved, here she told me, as we sat in a dimly lit hotel restaurant the night before his memorial service. The local families he worked with, they're all coming tomorrow. He made such a difference. I nodded, trying to find comfort in her words. Jake had mattered to people. His work had mattered. The memorial was beautiful and heartbreaking. Dozens of local families came, many, bringing small tokens of remembrance, hand-embroidered handkerchiefs, candles, small icons. They spoke about Jake in halting English or through translators, telling stories of his kindness, his respect, his dedication. I stood there accepting condolences in a language I didn't understand in a country I'd never visited before, feeling like I was in some terrible dream. That night alone in my hotel room, I found Jake's journal and his belongings that had been returned to me. I'd known he kept one. He'd been a dedicated journal writer since college, but I'd always respected his privacy. Now it felt like maybe it could offer some connection, some final words from him. The journal was mostly observations about his work, notes for reports, occasional musings about politics or humanitarian policy. But scattered throughout were entries about us, about me. Anne called today, excited about her promotion. One entry read, "I wish her family could see how incredible she is at her job." She downplayed it when she told them, already anticipating Scott somehow making it about himself or her mother finding some flaw in her achievement. It breaks my heart that she doesn't expect celebration from the people who should be her biggest champions. I told her we'd have our own celebration when I get back, champagne on the rooftop of our building watching the sunset over the Sound. I turned page after page, finding similar observations throughout the years. Jake had seen it all: the subtle put-downs, the dismissals, the way my accomplishments were minimized while Scott's were amplified. He'd noticed how calls to my parents often left me quiet and withdrawn. He'd recognized patterns I'd been too close to see clearly. "Sometimes I want to confront them," he'd written, after one particularly difficult Thanksgiving. "Tell Diane that her daughter is the strongest, most compassionate person I've ever known. Tell Scott that his constant competition is transparent and unnecessary. Tell Greg that his silence is a form of complicity." But Anne navigates it all with such grace. She's chosen to maintain these relationships on her terms. All I can do is make sure she knows she's valued and loved in our home. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. Jake had understood. Truly understood. A pain I'd barely acknowledged to myself. And now, he was gone. The one person who had seen me completely and loved me anyway. The next morning, I began the process of bringing him home. The flight from Kyiv to Warsaw was delayed by 3 hours. I sat in the terminal, Jake's ashes in a simple wooden box inside my carry-on, feeling disconnected from everyone around me. Travelers complained about minor inconveniences. Families reunited with hugs and laughter. Business people typed importantly on laptops. None of them knew that my husband was in a box by my feet. The delay meant I would miss my connection in Warsaw. At the service desk, a harried airline employee rebooked me on a later flight, which would then cause me to miss my final connection to Seattle. "The best I can do is get you to New York tonight, then Seattle tomorrow morning," she said. Not unkindly, but with the efficiency of someone with a line forming behind me. I nodded, too numb to argue or explain why I needed to get home sooner. What difference did another day make now? Jake would still be dead tomorrow. In Warsaw, things got worse. My checked bag, containing the few personal items of Jake's I'd been able to collect, including his wedding ring, watch, and the clothes he'd been wearing when he left, was lost in the shuffle of my rebooked flights. "We'll locate it and have it delivered to your home address," the baggage service representative assured me. I wanted to scream that they didn't understand that bag contained the last physical connections to my husband items, that had touched his skin that carried his scent. Instead, I filled out the forms with mechanical precision, providing my Seattle address and phone number. The flight to New York was 9 hours of purgatory. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on the book I'd brought or the movies available on the seatback screen. I just sat staring at nothing, occasionally resting my hand on my bag where Jake's ashes lay. When we landed at JFK, it was already dark. My flight to Seattle wasn't until 7 the next morning, which meant spending the night in the airport or finding a hotel. The thought of navigating New York, finding transportation, checking into a hotel, it all seemed impossible in my state of exhaustion and grief. I found a quiet corner in the terminal and sat with my bags. Pulled out my phone for the first time since turning it off in Ukraine. It powered on slowly, then began pinging with notifications, work, emails, social media alerts, a few messages from friends who'd heard the news. Nothing from my family since I'd informed them of Jake's death. With shaking hands, I opened our family group chat, typed my message about my arrival time in Seattle the next day, asking for a ride from the airport. When Scott's reply came, "We're busy, try Uber," I stared at it in disbelief. My brother lived 20 minutes from the airport. He worked from home as a financial consultant, setting his own hours. Busy was a choice, not a reality. Then my mother, "Why didn't you plan better?" Plan better. How exactly should I have planned my husband's sudden death and international repatriation? I typed, "No worries," and turned off my phone again, unable to bear any more. The panic attack hit without warning. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. The terminal seemed to spin around me as tears blurred my vision. I gasped for air, clutching my carry-on with Jake's ashes like it was a life preserver in a stormy sea. "Miss, are you all right?" A gentle voice broke through the roaring in my ears. I looked up to see a woman in an airport uniform, Tanya, according to her name tag, crouching beside me, concern evident in her eyes. I tried to speak, but no words came. "Deep breaths," she said, demonstrating. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." That's it. I followed her instructions, the tightness in my chest gradually easing. "I'm sorry," I finally managed. "No need for apologies," Tanya said. She was about my age, with kind eyes and a slight southern accent. "Can I help somehow? Get you some water?" "My husband died," I blurted out. "In Ukraine. I'm bringing him home." I gestured to my carry-on. Tanya's expression softened further. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." She sat down beside me. "When's your next flight?" "Tomorrow morning, to Seattle." "You planning to stay here overnight?" I nodded, lacking the energy to explain further. Tanya seemed to understand anyway. "Let me help you find a hotel nearby. You need proper rest." As she helped me look up hotels on her phone, my own phone pinged with a notification. A social media check-in from my cousin tagged with Scott and my parents at Scott's new vacation home on Lake Washington. Family dinner at Scott's new lake house. The timestamp was from 30 minutes ago. They weren't busy. They were having a family gathering without me on the day I was bringing my husband's remains home. Tanya must have seen something change in my expression. "What is it?" "Nothing," I said automatically, the same response I'd given for years when hurt by my family. I think a hotel is a good idea." She helped me order an Uber and wrote down the name and address of a hotel close to the airport. "They have a shuttle that will bring you back in the morning," she explained, walking me to the exit. "And listen, I'm on shift tomorrow too. If you need anything when you get back, ask for Tanya at the information desk." Her kindness from a complete stranger made the callousness of my family's response even more stark. At the hotel, I checked in mechanically, went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, unsure what to do next. The room was impersonal, but clean. A place to rest, though I doubted sleep would come. My phone rang. Melissa, my best friend since college, calling from Boston. "Anne, how are you doing? Are you back in the States?" Hearing her voice, someone who genuinely cared, broke something open inside me. I told her everything: Jake's death, the lonely journey, my family's response, The discovery that they were all together at Scott's lake house. Those absolute assholes, Melissa said, her voice tight with anger. I swear to God, Anne, if I could get to Seattle right now, I would. And I'd have some choice words for your family. It doesn't matter, I said wearily. It's just how they are. No, it's not okay, Melissa insisted. It's not okay that they've always treated you like this, and it's especially not okay now. Jake would be furious. At the mention of Jake, fresh tears came. I found his journal, I told her, and shared some of what I'd read. He saw it clearly, Melissa said softly. He always did. Remember when he called out Scott at your 30th birthday dinner for turning your promotion into a conversation about his bonus? I did remember. It had been one of the few times Jake had directly confronted my brother, telling him gently but firmly that the evening was about celebrating my achievement. I don't know how to do this without him, Mel, I whispered. One breath at a time, she said. That's all you can do right now. And listen, you're a journalist. You know how to tell stories that make people care, that make them understand important truths. What does that have to do with anything? Maybe it's time you told your own story, Melissa suggested. Not just to me, but to the world. The idea seemed absurd in that moment. But after we hung up, it lingered. I'd spent my career telling other people's stories, illuminating injustices and complex social issues. I'd never turned that lens on myself. With nothing else to do in the anonymous hotel room, I opened my laptop and began typing. Not an article exactly, just words. My story. The raw, unfiltered truth of what it felt like to lose Jake and face that loss alone. What it felt like to reach out to family in my darkest hour and be told to call an Uber. I wrote through the night, the words pouring out of me like blood from a wound. At some point, there was a knock at my door. A package delivery. I signed for it, confused, until I saw the customs declaration. Jake's personal effects forwarded from Ukraine. The package, I thought, had been in my lost luggage. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a small velvet bag containing Jake's wedding ring, his watch, his phone, and wallet. And beneath them, a folded piece of paper. I recognized Jake's handwriting immediately. It wasn't addressed or signed, clearly a letter he'd begun but never finished. The date at the top was the day before he died. I've been thinking about our conversation before I left, he'd written. About starting a family. You're right, there's never a perfect time. We could wait forever for the right moment, but maybe the right moment is simply when we decide it is. I've watched you with our friends' kids, seen how naturally you mother them. You'll be an amazing mom, Anne. And I promise I'll be there every step of the way. When I get home, let's really do this. Let's start our family. The letter ended there. Unfinished, like everything else, Jake and I would never get to do together. I clutched the paper to my chest, and finally completely broke down. Dawn found me still awake, eyes red and swollen, surrounded by the detritus of grief tissues. Jake's personal items laid out on the hotel desk, my laptop, open to the document I'd been writing all night. 16 pages of raw, unfiltered truth. I showered mechanically, the hot water doing little to ease the bone-deep exhaustion. As I dressed in the same clothes I'd been wearing for what felt like days, my phone rang. Derek, my editor at the Chronicle. Anne. His voice was tentative. I just heard about Jake. I'm so sorry. Thank you, I said automatically, the words empty from repetition. Take all the time you need, he continued. Your position is secure. We just want you to take care of yourself. I almost hung up then, ready to retreat back into my bubble of grief. But something made me pause. Melissa's words from the night before echoed in my mind. Maybe it's time you told your own story. Derek, I said slowly, I've been writing something. Oh, he sounded surprised. About Jake, about grief, about family. I hesitated. About what happens when the support systems we're supposed to count on fail. There was a long pause. Anne, we've been planning a special feature for months now, Derek finally said, on the cultural handling of grief in America. The isolation, the lack of community support the way our society expects people to just move on after a few days of bereavement leave. My breath caught. I didn't know that. It's still in the planning stages. But what you're describing, your personal experience that could be incredibly powerful as a centerpiece. I don't know if I can be objective about this, I warned. What I've written, it's raw, personal. That's exactly what we need, Derek said, his voice gaining enthusiasm. The statistics and expert opinions are important, but a first-hand account from someone like you, a respected journalist experiencing this firsthand, that's what will make readers truly understand. I glanced at my laptop. I need to think about it. Of course, Derek backtracked. I didn't mean to pressure you. This is a difficult time and— No, I interrupted. I mean, I need to think about whether I'm ready to make this public. To put my family's behavior under scrutiny. Whatever you decide, we support you, Derek assured me. Send me what you've written if you want feedback or don't. It's entirely your call. After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the hotel mirror. The woman looking back at me was almost unrecognizable. Pale, hollow-eyed, diminished. But somewhere in those eyes there was something else. A spark of— not anger, exactly. Determination. I'd spent my career giving voice to the voiceless. Maybe it was time to give voice to myself. I made it to the airport with time to spare, checking in, and finding my gate automatically moving through the motions like a sleepwalker. At the gate, I remembered Tanya's kindness from the night before. On impulse, I found the information desk. Is Tanya working today? I asked the man behind the counter. She just started her shift, he said. I can call her if it's important. A few minutes later, Tanya appeared, breaking into a smile when she saw me. You made it. Feeling any better today? The simple human connection, the genuine concern, nearly undid me again. I wanted to thank you, I said, for last night, for noticing. Her expression softened. Sometimes all we need is for someone to see us when we're hurting. I'm glad I could help even a little bit. We chatted briefly, and I learned she was working toward a degree in social work, hoping to specialize in crisis intervention. People often just need a bridge, she explained. Someone to help them cross from the worst moment of their life to whatever comes next. Her words stayed with me on the flight to Seattle. A bridge. That's what my family should have been. Instead, they'd left me stranded on the far shore of grief. The flight attendant's voice announcing our descent into Seattle brought me back to the present moment. In less than an hour, I would be back in the city I'd shared with Jake. Our apartment. Our life. Except now, it would just be me. As we taxied to the gate, I made a decision. I forwarded the document I'd written to Derek with a brief note. This is just a draft. I need to talk to my family before deciding whether to publish. But I wanted you to see it. Then I ordered an Uber to take me not to my apartment, but to my parents' house in the suburbs. It was time for a conversation that was long overdue. My parents' house looked exactly the same as it always had, a well-maintained craftsman in an upscale Seattle suburb with my mother's meticulously tended flower beds lining the walkway. I paid the Uber driver and stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, my carry-on with Jake's ashes beside me gathering my courage. The doorbell echoed inside. Footsteps approached. My mother opened the door, her expression shifting from neutral to shocked in an instant. Anne, what are you doing here? We thought you were coming tomorrow. I texted yesterday, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I said my flight landed at 5. Oh, she flustered, stepping aside to let me in. Well, come in. Your father's in his study. Scott and Jenna stopped by for lunch. They're in the kitchen. All of them. Here. Together. Just like the social media post had shown. I followed her through the familiar hallway, noticing the new family photos on the wall. Scott and his wife with their golden retriever. My parents at some charity gala. None with me or Jake. In the kitchen, Scott looked up from his phone, surprise crossing his features before he recovered. Hey sis, you made it back. My father appeared in the doorway to his study, reading glasses perched on his nose. Anne, we weren't expecting you. Clearly, I said, setting down my bag carefully. since none of you bothered to pick me up from the airport." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. My sister-in-law Jenna, always the peacemaker, stood up. "Anne, I'm so sorry about Jake. It's just awful." "Thank you, Jenna," I said, genuinely appreciating her acknowledgement. "It has been awful, especially handling everything alone in a foreign country." My mother busied herself at the counter. "Would you like some tea? Or coffee?" "What I'd like," I said evenly, "is an explanation. I texted all of you that I was coming home yesterday with Jake's ashes. I asked for a ride from the airport. You told me you were busy and to take an Uber." Scott rolled his eyes. "Don't be so dramatic, Anne. We had plans. You should have given us more notice." "Notice?" I repeated, my voice rising, despite my intention to stay calm. "My husband died suddenly. I had to navigate foreign bureaucracy, arrange a funeral, and bring his remains home. I'm sorry if that timeline was inconvenient for you." "What Scott means," my mother interjected, "is that we all have our own lives and responsibilities. You've always been so independent, we didn't think you really needed help." "Independent?" I laughed, a bitter sound. "Is that what you call it? I've been independent because I've had to be. Because every time I've needed support, you've all had something more important to do." My father cleared his throat. "Now, Anne, that's not entirely fair. We've always what, Dad, been there for me?" When I challenged. "When I graduated with honors, and you left early because Scott had a baseball game. When I won the Northwest Journalism Award, and Mom said it was nice, then spent 20 minutes talking about Scott's promotion. Or maybe when I texted yesterday that I was bringing my dead husband home, and you all decided to have a family dinner without me." The kitchen fell silent. Scott looked uncomfortable. My mother's lips thinned into a disapproving line. My father stared at the floor. "I saw the post on social media," I continued. "You weren't busy. You were here together having dinner at Scott's new lake house. You just didn't want to include me." "You're twisting things," Scott protested. "We've had that dinner planned for weeks. And frankly, Anne, nobody wanted to deal with you being all depressed and making everything about you." I stared at him, incredulous. "Making everything about me? My husband died, Scott. I buried him 10 days ago. What exactly should I be focusing on instead?" "Your new vacation property." "That's not what he meant," my mother said quickly. "Then what did he mean?" I demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems pretty clear that my grief is an inconvenience to all of you." "We're grieving too," my mother insisted. "Jake was part of this family." "Was he?" I asked quietly. "You barely acknowledged him when he was alive. You criticized his career choices, questioned his absences, when he was literally saving lives overseas, and now you claim to be grieving him." My mother's face flushed. "You've always been oversensitive. We're trying to help you move forward, not wallow in misery." "It's been 10 days," I repeated, my voice breaking. 10 days since I watched them lower his coffin into the ground. I'm not wallowing. I'm shattered. And I needed my family." Scott glanced at his watch. "Listen, we have a showing at a potential investment property in an hour. Can we do this another time?" Something inside me snapped. "No, Scott. We can't do this another time. This is happening now." I reached for my phone, pulled up the family group chat, and read aloud. "Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" Your response: "We're busy, try Uber." Mom's response: "Why didn't you plan better?" I looked up at them. Do you have any idea how that felt? To read those messages while sitting alone in an airport, carrying my husband's ashes. Jenna looked horrified. My father had the decency to appear ashamed. But Scott and my mother remained defensive. "You're a grown woman, Anne," my mother said. "You can't expect everyone to drop everything because you didn't make proper arrangements." "Proper arrangements," I repeated slowly, "for my husband's unexpected death." "You know what she means," Scott said impatiently. "Actually, I don't," I replied. "Why don't you explain it to me? Better yet, why don't you explain the screenshots you've been sharing with the extended family?" Their expressions told me everything. My cousin had texted me that morning, checking if I was okay, After seeing messages Scott had shared in the family extended group chat, the one I wasn't part of, "You've been painting me as demanding and yourselves as victims of my neediness," I said, the betrayal cutting deep, while I was burying my husband. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," Scott said, standing up. "This is exactly why we didn't want to deal with you yesterday. Everything is always a drama with you." I looked around at these people, my blood relatives, and felt something final settle within me. A decision, a clarity. "I need to go," I said, picking up my bag with Jake's ashes. "Anne, don't leave like this," my father said, finally stepping forward. "Let's talk through this calmly." "I've tried to talk to all of you for years," I replied. "You've never listened, and I don't think you're going to start now." "So you're just going to run away?" Typical Scott muttered. I turned to him, suddenly calm. "No, Scott. For once I'm not going to pretend everything is fine. I'm not going to minimize my feelings to make everyone else comfortable. Jake saw it, you know. He saw how you all treated me. He wrote about it in his journal." That seemed to land. Scott had always respected Jake despite everything. "Anne," my mother began, but I cut her off. "I'm going home now. I have decisions to make. Important ones." I walked to the door, then turned back. "If any of you actually want to be part of my life moving forward, you're going to need to do better." "Much better." I left without waiting for their response. Outside, I ordered another Uber to take me to the apartment Jake and I had shared. As the car pulled away, I saw my father come onto the porch watching me leave. He raised a hand in a half-hearted wave but made no move to stop me. At the apartment, everything was exactly as we'd left it. Jake's coffee mug still on his desk, his running shoes by the door, his book face down on the nightstand, a bookmark holding his place in a story he would never finish. I set the box containing his ashes on our mantel and looked around the space we'd called home. Then, I opened my laptop and sent a second email to Derek. "I've spoken to my family. I'm ready to publish. Call me when you have a moment." The phone rang less than 5 minutes later. "Are you sure about this?" Derek asked after we'd discussed the article. "Yes," I said firmly. "It's time to tell the truth. Not just about my family, but about how we as a society fail the grieving. How we expect people to handle the worst moments of their lives with minimal support and maximum composure. It's powerful, Anne, but there will be consequences. For your relationships, potentially, even professionally. I know, but I can't keep silent anymore. Jake would want me to speak up." Derek was quiet for a moment. "Okay, we'll run it as the lead feature tomorrow. The cost of grief when family support fails in crisis. The editorial team is already working on it. We'll send you the final version for approval before it goes live." That evening, I made a simple dinner I couldn't taste and watched the sunset from our balcony. The Seattle skyline glowed golden, then pink, then deepened to purple. Jake had loved this view. Said it reminded him that even in a city of thousands, we'd somehow found each other. At 9 o'clock, my phone pinged with an email from Derek. The final version of my article ready for publication. I read it through, made 2 minor changes, and sent it back with a simple message: approved. At midnight, it went live on the Chronicle's website. By morning, it would be in print. My truth there for everyone to see. I slept that night, with Jake's wedding ring on a chain around my neck, clutching his pillow that still faintly smelled like him. For the first time since his death, I didn't cry myself to sleep. There was a strange peace in finally speaking my truth. I woke to my phone buzzing incessantly. Texts, emails, social media notifications, a constant stream of alerts that had started sometime in the early morning hours. My article had gone live at midnight, and by 7 a.m., it had already been shared thousands of times. Most of the messages were from colleagues, acquaintances, and even strangers, expressing support, sharing similar experiences, thanking me for my honesty. A few were from extended family members, some apologetic for not reaching out sooner, others defensive of my parents and brother. Nothing from my immediate family. Yet, I made coffee and opened my laptop. The Chronicle had given my piece prime placement on their website, accompanied by a simple black and white photo of an empty airport waiting area, a visual representation of the isolation I'd described. Comments were pouring in beneath the article. Thank you for giving words to something I've experienced but couldn't articulate. I've never read something that so accurately captures the secondary trauma of being abandoned in grief. As someone who works in bereavement counseling, I'm sharing this with all my colleagues. This should be required reading. Derek called as I was reading through the responses. It's resonating, Anne. Big time. We've had more traffic this morning than for any story in the past year. The managing editor wants to know if you'd consider a follow-up piece. I need to process this one first, I said, still overwhelmed by the response. Of course. Take your time. He paused. Have you heard from your family? Not yet. Brace yourself, he advised. Based on what you've described, I doubt they'll take this lying down. He was right. At 9:30, Scott called. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mother. Then my father. Within minutes, all three had left messages, their tones ranging from Scott's furious, "How could you embarrass the family like this?" to my mother's coldly hurt, "I never thought you'd air family matters in public," to my father's plaintive, "Anne, please call us back so we can discuss this." I didn't call back. Instead, I took a shower, got dressed, and decided to walk to a nearby cafe for breakfast. I needed to be around people, even if they were strangers. As I waited for my order, my phone rang again, an unknown number. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Is this Anne Taylor?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "Carolyn Miller from Good Morning America. I read your piece in the Seattle Chronicle this morning, and we'd like to discuss having you on the show to talk about grief support in America." I nearly dropped my phone. "I'm sorry, what?" She repeated her request, explaining that they were doing a segment on bereavement and social support systems, and my article had perfectly captured the issue they wanted to highlight. "I'm not sure I'm ready for television," I said honestly. "We understand this is a difficult time," Carolyn assured me. "But your voice is important, and there's something else you should know." "What's that?" "Your husband contacted us about 3 months ago. He wanted to do a story on the psychological impact of humanitarian work on families. We have emails where he specifically mentioned you, talking about the support system spouses of aid workers need." My heart seemed to stop. "Jake contacted you?" "Yes. We were in early discussions about the piece. He spoke very highly of you, Mrs. Taylor. Said you were the unsung hero behind his work, that your strength made everything he did possible." Tears filled my eyes. Jake had been thinking about this issue about me, even when I hadn't known it. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course. Take the day. But we'd like to fly you to New York tomorrow if you're willing." After we hung up, I sat with my untouched breakfast processing this new information. Jake had wanted to tell our story too, in his own way. It felt like a message from him, an encouragement to continue what I'd started. By the time I returned to the apartment, 3 more news outlets had called. My article had been picked up by national news aggregators. A producer from NPR wanted to interview me for their afternoon program. The Chronicle's website had crashed briefly from the traffic. And my brother had left a voicemail, threatening legal action for defamation. I listened to his message, noting the fear beneath the bluster. Scott had always been concerned with appearances, with how others perceived the family. My article threatened the carefully cultivated image he'd built. My phone rang again. "Derek. Anne, I know you're getting bombarded right now, but I wanted you to hear this from me first. Your brother called the paper, demanding we retract the article. When the managing editor refused, he threatened to sue." I sighed. "Can he actually do that?" "Not successfully," Derek assured me. "Everything you wrote is your personal experience. You didn't even use their names, though anyone who knows your family will recognize them. Our legal team isn't concerned. But I wanted you to be prepared." After we hung up, I made a decision. I called Carolyn back at Good Morning America. "I'll do the interview," I said, "but I want to focus on the broader issue, not just my personal situation. This is about a cultural problem with how we support the grieving." "Absolutely," she agreed. "That's exactly the angle we want to explore." The next 24 hours passed in a blur. I packed a small bag arranged for a neighbor to water my plants and caught the red-eye to New York. A car met me at the airport, taking me directly to a hotel where I could rest for a few hours before the interview. In the green room the next morning, a makeup artist covered the dark circles under my eyes, while a producer briefed me on the segment. "We'll start with your personal experience, but then broaden to the larger issue," she explained. "The host will ask about your husband's work and how his death has affected you. Then we'll move to the response to your article and what you hope people take away from it." I nodded, surprisingly calm. This wasn't about my family anymore. It was about something bigger, a conversation that needed to happen about grief, support, and our responsibilities to one another. The interview itself passed in a strangely disconnected state. I answered questions clearly and thoughtfully, never mentioning my family by name, but speaking honestly about the isolation of grief. I shared some of what Jake had written in his journal about supporting loved ones through difficult times. I talked about Tanya at the airport, how her simple kindness had meant everything in that moment. "What do you hope changes as a result of this conversation?" the host asked as our time drew to a close. "I hope we can create a culture where grief isn't something to be rushed through or hidden away," I said. "Where reaching out for help is seen as strength, not weakness. And where we understand that supporting each other through life's darkest moments isn't a burden, it's the most fundamental expression of our humanity." As soon as the segment ended, my phone exploded with notifications. My story had clearly struck a nerve. People were sharing the interview, starting conversations about grief support in their own communities. Mental health professionals were chiming in with resources and validation. And somewhere in the flood of messages was a text from my father. "I saw your interview. We need to talk when you get back to Seattle." Alone. By the time I returned to Seattle 3 days later, my article and the subsequent interview had sparked a national conversation. My inbox contained thousands of messages, people sharing their own stories of abandonment, in grief, mental health professionals, offering resources, journalists requesting follow-up interviews. But the message that mattered most was a simple email from Melissa. "I'm flying in tomorrow. No arguments. I've already booked my ticket. You shouldn't be alone right now." True to her word, Melissa arrived the next morning. She took one look at me standing in the airport pickup area and wrapped me in a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "And Jake would be too." Having Melissa in the apartment brought a sense of normalcy I hadn't felt since Jake died. We ordered takeout, opened wine, and talked for hours. Not just about Jake or my family, but about everything and nothing, the way old friends can. "So, what happens now?" she asked, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights come on as dusk fell. "I don't know," I admitted. "The Chronicle has given me leave for as long as I need. Good Morning America wants me to consider being a contributor on their weekend segment about social issues. 3 publishers have reached out about a potential memoir." "Wow," Melissa looked impressed. "Ann Taylor, accidental spokesperson for grief reform." I smiled wryly. "Not exactly how I plan to make my mark in journalism, but maybe exactly what you were meant to do," she suggested. "You've always had this ability to cut through to the heart of things, to make people care about issues they might otherwise ignore." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But first, I need to figure out my own life, deal with my family, decide what to do about this apartment, all of Jake's things." "One step at a time," Melissa advised. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight." The next morning, I received an unexpected call from Derek. "Anne, there's someone here at the Chronicle who wants to meet you. A woman named Tanya Williams. Says she met you at JFK during your layover." Surprised, I agreed to come to the office. Tanya was waiting in the lobby, looking slightly out of place but smiling when she saw me. "I hope it's okay that I found you," she said. "After your article came out and then the interview, I just wanted to see how you were doing." "You came all the way to Seattle?" She laughed. "No, though I would have. I'm actually here visiting my sister. She lives in Tacoma. When I saw your article mention the Seattle Chronicle, I thought I'd take a chance." We went for coffee, and I learned more about her life, her studies in social work, her own experience with grief after losing her father, suddenly 3 years earlier. Your story resonated with me, she explained. Not because my family abandoned me, they were incredible, but because I saw how rare that is. Most of my clients in my practicum don't have adequate support systems. Clients. I volunteer at a grief counseling center, she explained. After your interview aired, our hotline received twice the usual number of calls. People who'd been suffering silently thinking they were wrong to need support. The idea that my personal pain might be helping others was profoundly healing. Before we parted, Tanya mentioned a grief support group in Seattle that she'd researched. They meet on Thursday evenings. No pressure, but it might be worth checking out. That Thursday, I found myself in a community center meeting room with 8 other people who understood loss in a way few others could. I didn't speak much that first session, just listened, as others shared their experiences. A woman who'd lost her wife to cancer, a man whose teenage son had died in a car accident, a couple grieving a stillbirth. I returned the following week, and the week after that. Gradually, I began to share my own story. Not the public version I'd written about, but the private grief, how I still reached for Jake in the middle of the night, how I couldn't bring myself to delete his voicemails, how sometimes the pain was so physical, I couldn't breathe. It was at one of these meetings that I met Marcus. He was 41, a landscape architect who'd lost his wife to breast cancer 18 months earlier. He spoke with a quiet steadiness about his journey through grief, how he was learning to be both mother and father to their 10-year-old daughter. The second year is harder than the first, in some ways, he told the group. The first year, people expect you to be a mess. The second year, they think you should be moving on. Whatever that means. After the meeting, we found ourselves walking to the parking lot together. Your article changed things for me, he said abruptly. I read it the day it came out before it went viral. It gave me permission to be angry about some of the things people said after Lisa died. The "everything happens for a reason" comments. The "she wouldn't want you to be sad" advice. I'm glad it helped, I said simply. Would you want to grab coffee sometime, he asked. Just as friends, he added quickly. Fellow travelers on this unwanted journey. Our coffee meetup turned into a genuine friendship. Marcus understood things. Others couldn't. The weird time warps of grief. The guilty relief of good moments. The unexpected triggers that could bring everything crashing back. We texted each other on difficult days. Met for walks around Green Lake. Recommended books and podcasts that had helped us. It wasn't romantic. We were both still deeply in love with the partners we'd lost. But it was a connection I hadn't expected to find. Meanwhile, my relationship with my family remained strained. Scott hadn't spoken to me since his legal threats had been dismissed by the Chronicle's lawyers. My mother sent occasional stiff texts checking if I was still upset. Only my father seemed genuinely affected by what had happened. 3 weeks after my return to Seattle, he called. Can we meet for lunch? He asked. Just you and me. We arranged to meet at a small cafe near my apartment. When I arrived, he was already there, looking older than I remembered. He stood when he saw me awkwardly holding a bouquet of sunflowers. Jake's favorite. These are for you, he said, handing them to me. Jake mentioned once that they were his favorite. Said they reminded him of you, bright and resilient. The thoughtful gesture caught me off guard. Thank you. We ordered, making small talk until our food arrived. Then my father set down his fork and looked at me directly. I've failed you, Anne, he said simply. Not just with Jake's death, but throughout your life. I've enabled your mother's favoritism toward Scott. I've stood by while you were diminished and dismissed. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but really I was just being a coward. The raw honesty stunned me. Dad, please let me finish. I've been seeing a therapist since your article came out. 3 sessions a week. Trying to understand how I became the kind of father who would let his daughter suffer alone after losing her husband. Tears filled his eyes. Your article. It was like looking in a mirror. I've been avoiding for decades. I didn't like what I saw. I never meant to hurt you, I said quietly. I just needed to tell the truth. The truth was long overdue, he acknowledged. And I needed to hear it. He reached across the table hesitantly, taking my hand. I can't undo the past, Anne. But I'm asking for a chance to do better moving forward. Without your mother or Scott involved, at least for now. Just us rebuilding what I broke. I studied him, searching for signs of the familiar pattern, the initial apology, followed by excuses, and eventually a return to the status quo. But something seemed different. There was a humility I'd never seen before. I'd like that, I finally said. But it won't be easy. There's a lot of hurt there. I know, he nodded. I'm ready to do the work. As we finished lunch, he mentioned seeing my Good Morning America interview. Jake would have been proud of you, he said. He always saw your strength even when the rest of us missed it. Over the following weeks, my father and I began a careful reconciliation. We met for coffee or lunch twice a week. He came to the apartment and helped me sort through some of Jake's things, listening patiently as I shared stories behind meaningful objects. He even attended a grief support group meeting with me, sitting quietly in the back, witnessing a side of life he'd previously avoided. Meanwhile, my professional life was evolving in unexpected ways. The Chronicle had offered me a new position, focusing on social issues, particularly around mental health and community support systems. One of the publishers who'd approached me had presented a formal offer for a memoir about grief and resilience. And Melissa, who'd extended her visit by 2 weeks, had been helping me plan something important, a proper memorial celebration for Jake. Your family doesn't deserve to be there, she declared as we worked on the guest list. This is about honoring Jake with people who genuinely cared about him. So, on a Saturday afternoon, 6 months after Jake's death, 50 people gathered in our favorite park, overlooking Puget Sound. Jake's colleagues from the aid organization, our friends, neighbors, and people from my grief support group. My father came alone, standing quietly at the back, until I went to bring him forward. One by one, people shared stories about Jake, many I'd never heard before. How he'd spent an entire night helping a new colleague prepare for her first field assignment. How he'd carried a child 3 miles to reach medical help during a flood in Bangladesh. How he remembered the coffee preferences of every person in his office. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, I scattered some of Jake's ashes into the Sound. Not all, I wasn't ready for that finality yet, but enough to feel like he was rejoining the world he'd loved. That night, alone in our apartment, I took out my laptop and began writing again. Not about grief this time, but about healing, about finding unexpected connection in the aftermath of loss. About building a new life, not by forgetting the old one, but by carrying it forward with honor. The memoir was beginning to take shape. 1 year after Jake's death, my life had taken shape in ways I never could have imagined during those dark days immediately after his loss. My memoir, Bridges Finding Connection Through Grief, was in final edits with the publisher. The weekly column I now wrote for the Chronicle, focusing on community support systems and mental health, had developed a loyal following, and I had become, somewhat reluctantly but with growing purpose, a voice for grief reform in America. I never planned to become an advocate, I told Marcus, as we walked around Green Lake one crisp autumn morning. I was just trying to process my own pain. The best advocates usually are, he replied. That's why people listen to you. You're not speaking from theory, but from lived experience. Our friendship had deepened over the months. Marcus's daughter Lily had even joined us occasionally, for movie nights or Saturday morning pancakes. They had become an unexpected bright spot in my life, not replacing what I'd lost with Jake, but creating something new and valuable alongside those memories. My relationship with my father had continued to evolve as well. He had made real substantive changes, attending therapy regularly, reading books about emotional validation and family dynamics, making consistent efforts to connect with me on my terms. We'd even begun a tradition of Sunday morning hikes, something Jake and I had loved doing. My mother and Scott remained more complicated. After the initial anger and threats, they'd retreated into a stiff formality, occasional text messages, birthday cards. My mother had made one attempt at reconciliation, inviting me to lunch, but it had quickly devolved into subtle criticism and minimizing of my feelings. I set boundaries, I explained to my therapist, Dr. Rivera. I'd started seeing her 3 months after Jake's death, recognizing that the grief support group was helpful, but not sufficient. I told her I'd be open to rebuilding our relationship if she could acknowledge the patterns of favoritism and emotional neglect. She said I was dwelling on the past and needed to move forward as a family. "And how do you feel about that response?" Dr. Rivera asked. "Sad but not surprised," I admitted. "And strangely, I'm okay with it. I've stopped expecting her to be something she's not capable of being." That was perhaps the most unexpected development of all, the realization that acceptance didn't have to mean forgiveness or reconciliation. Some relationships would never heal, and that was a painful but necessary truth to embrace. In early November, I received an email that would open yet another new chapter. The International Bereavement Support Foundation was holding their annual conference in Chicago and wanted me to deliver a keynote address. The topic: Rebuilding Support Systems After Loss. "You should do it," Melissa encouraged during our weekly video chat. She'd returned to Boston after her extended stay, but we'd remained as close as ever. "Your story has already helped thousands. Think how many more it could reach." I agreed to the keynote, spending weeks crafting a speech that balanced personal experience with broader advocacy. The conference was scheduled for November 8th, exactly 1 year to the day, since I'd sent that fateful text message to my family from JFK Airport. The day before my flight to Chicago, I received an unexpected call from Tanya, the airport employee who'd helped me during my moment of crisis. "I saw you're speaking at the IBSF conference," she said. "I'm attending as part of my graduate program. I'd love to see you there." I'd like that I said, touched that our paths were crossing again. "Actually, there's something I want to tell you in person." At the conference the next day, I found myself standing in front of 800 professionals dedicated to improving bereavement support. My father sat in the front row, having flown in that morning to support me. Marcus and Lily had come too, along with Melissa and Derek from the Chronicle. "A year ago today," I began. I sent a text message to my family. I had just buried my husband overseas. I was exhausted, heartbroken, and completely alone. I asked for a ride from the airport. They told me to take an Uber. A murmur went through the audience. "That moment of abandonment became a catalyst," I continued. "Not just for my personal journey through grief, but for a national conversation about how we support or fail to support each other in our darkest hours." I shared my story, not dwelling on the family drama, but focusing on the systemic issues it highlighted. I talked about how workplace bereavement policies often allow only 3 days of leave, as if grief could be scheduled and completed in a long weekend. I discussed how our culture's discomfort with emotional pain leads to platitudes instead of presence. I emphasized how true support requires sustained effort, not just casseroles in the first week. And today, I said, approaching my conclusion, I'm honored to share some news that gives meaning to my husband Jake's legacy. The Taylor Foundation for Families of Humanitarian Workers launches next month, providing financial, logistical, and emotional support to those whose loved ones serve in crisis zones around the world. The audience applauded as I explained how Jake's former organization had partnered with me to create this resource, something that would have made all the difference during my own crisis. But there's one more announcement I'm particularly proud to make. I continued, smiling at Tanya in the third row. The Bridges program will train and place grief support specialists in major airports across the country, starting with JFK O'Hare and SeaTac. These individuals will be available to travelers who are navigating loss, whether flying to funerals, transporting remains, or returning home after burying a loved one far away. I explained how Tanya's simple kindness had inspired the program, how sometimes all a person needs is a bridge, someone to help them cross from the worst moment of their life to whatever comes next. After the speech at the small reception that followed, Tanya approached me with tears in her eyes. "I can't believe you remembered our conversation about bridges," she said, "and now it's becoming real. You're the first person I want to hire when you finish your degree," I told her. "You already know exactly how to do this work." Later that evening, our small group, my father Marcus and Lily, Melissa, Tanya, and Derek gathered for dinner at the hotel restaurant. We toasted Jake's memory and the foundation that would carry his legacy forward. To bridges, my father said, raising his glass, and to the people brave enough to build them. The next morning we all headed to O'Hare together, a strange symmetry that wasn't lost on me. A year ago I had stood alone in an airport, abandoned and bereft. Today I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. As we waited at the gate for my flight back to Seattle, my father pulled me aside. "I want you to know how proud I am of you," he said. "Not just for your speech or the foundation, but for your strength in facing everything this past year has thrown at you." "I couldn't have done it without support," I said meaningfully, including him in that acknowledgement. He nodded, understanding. "I'll never stop trying to make up for the past, Anne, but I'm also grateful for this present we're building." As I boarded the plane, Jake's wedding ring hung on a chain around my neck, not as an anchor to grief, but as a touchstone to the love that had shaped me. I was not the same woman who had texted her family from JFK a year ago. I was stronger, more certain of my worth, more deliberate about who and what I allowed into my life. The plane lifted off, carrying me back to Seattle, to my apartment, that no longer felt haunted by Jake's absence, but honored by his memory. To my new career as a writer and advocate. To the grief support group, where I now served as a peer mentor for new members. To the community I'd built consciously and carefully from the ashes of loss. I wasn't moving on from Jake or from grief. I was moving forward with both, integrating them into the new life I was creating day by day. The pain hadn't disappeared. It never would completely, but it had changed form, becoming less jagged, more manageable. Some days were still hard. Some moments still took my breath away with sudden longing. But those moments now existed alongside joy, purpose, and deep, authentic connection. As the plane reached cruising altitude, I looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about how far I'd come from that text message and its cruel reply to a life rebuilt with intention and meaning. From isolation to community, from abandonment to belonging. "Have you found that grief changes over time?" a woman's voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see my seatmate, a woman about my age, looking at me hesitantly. "I'm sorry," she continued. "I recognized you from the conference. I'm a grief counselor from Portland. I was so moved by your speech." "Grief doesn't really get smaller," I told her after a moment of consideration, "but we grow larger around it. We build a life that can carry it." As we continued talking, sharing professional experiences and personal stories, I felt Jake's presence in a way that was comforting rather than painful. He would have loved this, the connections being formed, the meaningful work, the way his life continued to matter through the foundation that bore his name. And in that moment, 30,000 feet above the earth, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again so soon after losing him: peace. Not because the grief had ended, but because I had discovered my own capacity to live fully even while carrying it. What do you think about family support during difficult times? Have you ever experienced something similar to what happened in this story? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the family we create is more important than the one we're born into.